So typically I like to be as late as possible to a discussion, but today I wanted to cover something more topical for once in my life and look at Jax and the Amazing Digital Circus. Specifically because I was kind of surprised that more people didn't pick up on Jax's transness throughout the series, and although it is confirmed now, if you're still on the fence, I want to walk you through a bunch of things I, and likely many other viewers, picked up on during the show's 9-episode run. That said, I think my argument is a lot stronger with the addition of things that Gooseworks has said while the show is airing, and especially things she said now that it's over. However, I will not be using any of that in my discussion, as some people don't see it as canon or proof of anything at all, so I'll just leave these over here and we'll take a look at them later during the finale. And besides, I think the show gives us plenty to work with on its own. Before looking at the finale, I wanted to go back and look through the rest of the show to get a refresher on all the little moments that stood out to me. Though the first 4 episodes honestly don't give us too much on this front, aside from the occasional
"Ladies first." No, wait, why would I say that?
And you could look more into Jax not putting her name on the name tag in episode 4, but it's not until episode 5 where little cracks begin to show themselves. For one, Jax is far and away the character that brings up gender, sexuality, and especially appearance the most out of the whole cast. Her conversation with Pomni under the stars is where we first get more insight on her character as a whole, as well as the "this is what peak male performance looks like" line.
Excuse you, this is what peak male performance looks like. My ears and tail are kind of the pinnacle of masculinity.
I was kind of surprised at people taking this line as proof Jax wasn't trans, because I think it's very clearly not what this line is telling us. Being delivered satirically, it's pretty obvious that Jax does not believe her body is actually the pinnacle of masculinity. Of course, this gets derailed by the whole tail thing, but it's almost as if she's fishing for a reaction from Pomni, which in turn would validate her not being perceived as masculine or super macho. If Pomni laughed at Jax calling herself masculine, then it could be reaffirming that even though she is perceived as being a guy, she's not like overtly masculine. It's not a secret that a lot of Jax's actual thoughts and feelings are always obscured by layers of irony, and I absolutely think this is one of the first glimpses at what she truly feels. And I have no doubt in my mind that this is how this conversation is supposed to be read, given what she has to say about Gangle and Ragatha prior. She's letting her guard down ever so slightly around Pomni, even if she doesn't realize it yet. There's also the fact that the clouds behind her literally depict a rabbit without a tail and a bow. Curious indeed. I'll move away from this for now, but one last thing that's kind of always bothered me is trying to figure out if Jax's tail has literally any significance. I'm gonna go with no, given these are the only 2 things I've ever seen Gooseworks say about it, which leads me to believe it was just added after episode 5 because it looks cool or whatever. Continuing on with the episode, during the bar scene, Jax makes 2 jokes targeted towards Zooble, basically making fun of them for having 2 sort of stereotypically queer jobs as a tattoo artist and a bartender. There's the assumption that because she's trans, she's aware of these stereotypes, and this would line up with what we know about her real life post-finale as she frequents Zooble's bar. Though I don't think this really means much by itself, but I do think some important things build off of these jokes. Moving on to softball, I personally never bought into how much they marketed and made Jax. Yeah, I'm a fucking loser. This moment and the following scenes of her during the game are all extremely important and led to many of the trans Jax headcanon/speculations prior to the finale. Zooble, getting back at Jax for the bar sequence, has Gangle start a vote to put Jax in a maid outfit, but as they remark, Jax gets way more upset about it compared to anything else we, and presumably they, had seen so far. While she's getting more and more upset, Zooble's body language and expression give off this impression that something kinda clicked for them. Since they're the only trans/gender non-conforming member of the circus, and given Jax's sort of telling on herself through irony in the scene before, I definitely think Zooble picked up on something here. Unlike in pretty much the entire show up until this moment, Jax doesn't have a quip, ironic remark about how she looks, or some sort of innuendo to immediately shield herself with. After striking out and sitting with Pomni and Ragatha, she looks completely checked out, unable to make eye contact with either of them at first. That is, until she begins making fun of Gangle, shifting the other's attention from her to Gangle, which is when she starts to act more like what we'd expect. In the ensuing argument, Jax becomes way more deflective, sending all of Ragatha's comments right back at her, really just doing everything she's able to in order to keep the focus away from her. This is until Ragatha gives a genuine apology for alluding to Ribbit and Kaufmo earlier, which just kind of stun-locks Jax. During her earlier conversation with Pomni, she mentions how Ragatha's care for others feels really disingenuous and makes her view Ragatha as someone who never ever really means what they say. But in that moment, I think Ragatha, probably accidentally, pierced through Jax's armor and hit her right in the heart. This is aided by the fact that right now, Jax feels especially vulnerable in this outfit she's not supposed to like, and is unable to shift things away from her again without unearthing those memories of her and Ribbit. Episodes 6 through 8, at least for discussing Jax's character, I think work a lot better when put in conversation with the finale, as we can more directly link her behavior in the prior to some of the things she said during her conversation with Ribbit in episode 9. Basically what I'm saying is I'm going to jump around a bit because so many moments make so much more sense put in context. Her archetype monologue, as I'll call it in episode 6, I find to be kind of similar to what she tells Ribbit about how her parents would force her into really rigid gender roles. When she initially brings this idea up to Pomni remarks,
"What's your archetype then? The villain?"
which causes Jax to scoff and sort of grimace. By framing her as the villain, this essentially parallels what she says her mom would do whenever she was upset with her. Her mom would compare her to her father, someone who was likely seen as a sort of villain by her mother, and so unknowingly, Pomni is doing the exact same thing. Though being more guarded here, Jax is able to brush this off and continue her rant. She believes the longer everyone is here, they all eventually fall into different archetypes, dare I say, like characters in a show. I can see this going two different ways. Firstly, because of what her parents instilled to her about what a man is and should be, I think she's internalized this idea that people can't change who they are, and if they can, they shouldn't. Everyone should just go along with whatever they're birthed into, whether that be their assigned sex or here the archetype they fall into. The other way I see this going is that, well, Jax said she chose to be the funny one, so that should make my prior point hold less weight. She herself proved that people can choose what they want to become if, as she says, they have enough foresight to recognize that beforehand. But as with everything that comes out of this dumb rabbit's mouth, I have a really hard time believing she actually means that. Through becoming the funny one, she's able to mask a lot of her emotions she's yet to work through regarding Ribbit, Kaufmo, and who knows what else. Since nothing she says can be confirmed as true, no one will bother looking any deeper, meaning her secret won't be known by anyone else. Through the few flashbacks that we get, I really don't see Jax as being the quote-unquote funny one the whole time. She only starts to become this caricature of herself to push everyone further away from prying into her true self. This becomes even more apparent by how her blowing up at Pomni is almost a continuation of her shouting at Ribbit on the mountain. Prior to all of this, Pomni says,
"I'm learning a lot about you today."
And I really do not think this is a normal reaction to that statement, unless of course you've got something you don't want other people to know. Jax tries to do the same thing she did to Ribbit after realizing her and Pomni are beginning to grow closer together, though skipping the opening up part in favor of going straight to the screaming and pushing away. There's also the line,
"I'm just a misunderstood little chicken fetus in an egg that needs to be cracked open,"
which is just not a real expression, believe it or not, and could easily be taken as a little Freudian slip given the connotation of what an egg represents in trans spaces. Ending the argument with,
"There's nothing more to me. So please, just stop looking,"
reinforces this defense system she's built up throughout her entire life, believing that if Pomni does get a real look at her, she'll reject her, because that's the only reaction she's come to expect. Even if that isn't true, it is to her. To close out episode 6, there's the character awards ceremony where Jax gets up and goes to the bathroom to attempt to calm herself down. I made this whole video when this episode aired about how when Kinger and Ragatha had their heart-to-heart and Zubul and Gangle had theirs, we get to see them in reflection, indicating to the viewer that during these moments we are getting their true emotions and real feelings, which is true for everyone other than Pomni and Jax. At the awards ceremony though, we get to see Jax in the bathroom mirror, and the first thing she says is, "God, I look stupid." She says the same thing to Ribbit when she first appeared in the circus, but unlike then, she has no one to uplift her at this moment. Episode 7 gives us a few more hints about Jax, and I think using a couple things established in the previous episode, we can piece more stuff together. Jax notably sits out during the swimsuit try-on thing and remains on the beach while everyone else is enjoying themselves. Zubul eventually comes up to pour water on her, which leads to another conversation between the two. Importantly, Zubul says they're learning to feel better about their body through talking with Gangle, something Jax comments on back in episode 5. This further shakes up Jax's idea of rigid roles and character archetypes. If Zubul is able to change, that should could mean that she can too. I think that at least part of her knows this, but she wants to bury that part down even further out of embarrassment and or shame. I find it interesting that Zool specifically says that they talk about their problems with the people that they trust, and in response, Jax says she doesn't have any problems, not that she has no one she can trust. Despite basically saying that to Pomni just an episode ago. This is a smaller thing, but one that I think opens up a larger discussion, and one that I saw more people picking up on as things began to get less subtle. After leaving the beach and going through what we can only assume to be a sort of hallucination that may end up in abstraction, Jax's eyes go a few different colors while she's trying to catch her breath. Importantly here, we get a flash of the light blues and pinks of the trans flag. Wow, foreshadowing is a narrative device. But also her eyes could just be these colors because they look nice, right? Jumping to the trans flag is maybe just me being biased. Well, I think the Amazing Digital Circus as a series has always been pretty deliberate in their color choices. The example that sticks out to me the most is in the episode prior, where after shooting Ragatha, Pomni pops up behind Jax, and we have Jax on a solid red backdrop, while Pomni is on a blue one. While at the time this didn't mean anything, I knew it would eventually. When I made that whole video in episode 6, I was losing my mind trying to think of anything that these colors could indicate. Anyway, come episode 7, I finally got the answer I was hoping for. Not wanting to leave the circus, Jax presses the red button. I see it. Red background, red button. You see it. This doesn't necessarily prove anything per se, but to me it shows that there is indeed thought behind why things are the color that they are. So I have a hard time believing Jax's eyes show us the pink and blue for no reason at all. Oh, and what was that? You wanted me to keep talking about color choices in the show? Great, I'm so glad. If you think that last part was a stretch, you'd love to hear what I have to say about Jax's design itself. Jax's design is the only one that's sort of layered, hence the whole peeling thing, but we'll get to that in episode 8. But something else I find interesting is the choice to use contrasting colors for her inside and outside. This too could be written off as a choice just to make her visually distinct or something, but I want to reach a little further. Because yellow and purple are contrasting, I can see this being representative of Jax's insides being at odds with her outward appearance. Something I would say is pretty stereotypically transcoded. She's really the only character whose design has this much contrast in the colors, and if you want to point to Zooble, I think they're a different case. Their body is made of a bunch of interchangeable, colorful parts that are distinct in not only their color, but their shape too, which helps to reflect Zooble's internal struggles with their appearance and identity. That said, I don't see why this same logic can't be applied to Jax's body, reflecting her struggles too, though maybe not as obvious. This is aided by the fact that Kane made her bedroom all cutesy and pink, and as we see more characters' rooms throughout the show, we see that they are reflective of who lives in them. So between the trans colors in the eyes, the constant clash of internal versus external, and now the bedroom, it's clear that Jax's own struggles with dysphoria are leaving the realm of ironic comments and deflection, now bubbling to the surface of everything she does. Or episode 8, gives us 2 key scenes I want to talk about. And by this point, while the show is still running, I was really starting to get the feeling that we were going to have to argue about trans Jax only being a headcanon forever. Like all the stuff I've been explaining, even if it did practically confirm it for me, it was never enough solid evidence to convince people Jax was trans, though I guess no amount of that is enough sometimes. I suppose this is where I do want to address the which way bruh debate in regards to if Jax was a trans guy or a trans girl that was going on during this time. I'm obviously biased here and read her as being trans femme since the beginning, but I don't want to disregard other people's interpretations of her character. Because of this, I reached out to friend of the show, Sonny Dionysus, to ask about trans mask interpretations of Jax, to which he said, looking back on the maid dress scene, I do think it's fair that fans interpreted both trans femme and trans mask Jax. Like being forced to be in a feminine outfit is a very relatable trans mask experience, but when I saw Jax really relaxing into it, I thought it was more authentically her than just a get-up. There are of course trans masks who are gender non-conforming, and that added another layer of relatability to that interpretation for some trans masks. And looking through some of these conversations online, I find what Sonia said to be pretty accurate, though of course not all encompassing. So shouts out, thank you. And to bring up something Gooseworks has said post-finale, it's of course like totally chill to see whatever you want in Jax. She's a fictional character, have fun is what I took away from this reply. It's important to acknowledge that she's a trans femme character, but if a different interpretation makes you happy, then like who cares? To get back to the episode for a sec, flashback, Kane puts the cast through their worst nightmares that he knows of, and Jax's just ties everything that I've said prior together. She has her external body forcibly removed so that just her internal self is left cowering while being laughed at by the only people she's ever called friends in the circus. Despite how she said she doesn't care what people think time and time again, it's only become more apparent that she's constantly thinking about how people perceive her, along with her comments about how dumb she looks or jokes about how masculine she is. It's also clear that she has herself under a microscope at all times. There's also the panic attack she has after realizing that she can't deny the circus isn't fake anymore. Her insistence on none of this being real is a part of her that I think can be taken in a multitude of ways. And one that Sunny mentioned while we were talking was how if the circus and everyone in it are real, then so is her dysphoria and her deepest feelings. Moreover, this would then confirm that because of her repression, she is in fact guilty of her innermost feelings directly hurting someone who cared about her. I don't believe that Jax thought the circus wasn't real from the beginning. I think that only developed as a way to take away the blame caused by her previous and continued actions. Now we finally get to the long-awaited finale, and I'm done making jokes. I'm going to be fully serious from here on out. What a goddamn shame! I think the video has made me laugh more than the entire series. Holy shit, I don't know why I find it so funny. So I feel like literally every video I make about trans characters and narratives, or transcoded characters and narratives, it always arrives at the same conclusion. Sometimes you just don't connect to it. Of course, an extremely personal character or story won't evoke the same emotions in everyone, and that's just how it is. Is this me saying Jax's character or the Amazing Digital Circus as a whole is without flaws, and pointing those out just means you just don't get it? No, of course not. I'm rightfully embarrassed about my Jax mug, but I really appreciate how Gooseworks made Jax a messy, at times downright toxic character, but one that feels like she comes from a place of sincerity. Though I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's actually look at what the finale gives us. Having Jax abstract off screen is a decision I'm quite surprised to see people give the show flack for. If we're understanding abstraction as an allegory for suicide, having this happen so unceremoniously is unfortunately a very realistic depiction. As a viewer, I think episode 7 basically confirmed that Jax was going to abstract, and given the fact that Gooseworks said this was planned from the beginning, really the only shocking part was how early this happens into the episode. Exploring Jax's mind palace is really the most interesting part of all of this because it puts everything I've said before into context. Seeing all the different kinds of person she would have become depending on who she lost just totally upends her supposed mindset about archetypes and how unchanging they are. The visceral shut up when there's a noise from behind the locked door further goes to show that even though these Jaxes are different from what we know of her now, none of them are her at her core. That's why I think it makes so much sense for the one being behind there, a Jax who was forced to come to terms with her emotions and repression. Assuming the locked door in the room before was if Pomni abstracted, that would most likely mean this locked door houses the Jax that accompanies that scenario. Maybe in that world, after no longer being able to hide behind the lie that none of this is real, she has to accept that her actions have directly caused two of the only people she was close with to permanently leave her. Her tone and the way she acts around Ribbit, Kaufmo, and presumably everyone else in the circus during the flashback sequence is a complete 180 from how she is now, though not so much that it isn't believable. We get glimpses of that Jax every once in a while, and clearly those times have influenced her deeply, down to her order at the cafe. Jax's conversation with Ribbit, I think, has a good balance of hitting you over the head with its meaning, but also leaving enough room for interpretation and personal perspective in its details. There's of course the aforementioned strained / non-existent relationship with her father, and how he turned into this figure that she was repeatedly compared to by her mother. When talking about the last day she was home, I find the wording to be even more revealing than anything else Jax has said prior. Saying that she told her mother something deep and personal, rather than telling Ribbit and the viewer what that was, goes to show how much of an impact that moment had and still has on her. I think it's safe to assume that that personal thing was her coming out in one way or another. But where I have a few different thoughts is on her reaction to her mother's demeaning comments and hug, and why she even came out in the first place. My first train of thought is that Jax, as we know, is someone who pushes people away when she feels they've gotten too close to knowing the real her. And that response most likely stems from a self-destructive fear that if they knew who she really was, they would leave her. Ultimately, driving someone away early, as she sees it, to save herself from the inevitable pain she would end up feeling as they left her. And so, through this perspective, I first read Jax as coming out to her mother almost as a way to get her mom to push Jax away first. Getting her mother to disown her and leave her life because she doesn't agree with her true feelings is a way to frame all of this to line up with her preconceived ideas about how people think of her if she embraced her true self. Then the hug might take on a completely different meaning, though I do recognize this is skipping over the personal insults she mentions. Getting hugged in this moment moment where she thought she was going to be pushed away, even if it wasn't out of acceptance, is the last thing Jax wanted in this moment, and so her response of pushing her down and running away, I think emphasizes her core struggles. To look at all this from a different angle, I also see her coming out as one last attempt to truly connect with her mother. One final Hail Mary to see if this relationship can genuinely work before she throws in the towel. Unfortunately, her mother's response only reaffirmed what the avoidant part of her brain was telling her. Getting hugged after being berated in your most vulnerable state by someone who was supposed to be there for you might have caused her want to exit the situation as quickly and as forcibly as possible. Having been proven right, there was seemingly nowhere else to go than anywhere but here. She says that she has many regrets about that day, and I think the most obvious one is her saying anything at all. Even if she had to live a life of ridicule and repression, at this moment, that life might sound preferable because at least it has a set path. Ribbit putting their bow on Jax and how her pupils do the little dilation thing while a blush creeps across her face is honestly such a cute moment. But God, sitting in the theater next to my beautiful fiance and a dad who got dragged along by his kid, I got so embarrassed because to me this was Gooseworks saying, "Here, damn," and practically having Jax turn to the camera and say, "Hello, I am Jax and I am transgender." I fully understand why this was shown this way, and I do really like the moment though, don't get me wrong. It's also fitting that Ribbit, like Zubul, was able to recognize Jax's true feelings through what was being said, given she's probably a demigirl or something along those lines. Damn, this whole circus gay as hell. Though, despite all this, people somehow still didn't see it. Look, all the shit I've said thus far, even as undeniable as I wholeheartedly believe it is, people still just didn't get it or actively avoided getting it. If you genuinely didn't recognize Jax's transes up until this scene, that's cool, I understand, it was more subtle. But then to hear all of this and to see this frame and the following scenes with Pomni and still think none of that indicates even a hint of trans femininity is what boggles my mind. Of course you would say that it doesn't really matter, and this is usually the part where I'd say, yeah, you're kinda right, but I think it does matter, not only to me, but to all the people who see parts of themselves in Jax. Having arguably the most popular character in a show that has reached hundreds of millions of people come out in a way that feels genuine and true to their character is something that is undoubtedly important. I also like how it doesn't magically excuse all the shit she's done in the circus. Instead, what it does is help flesh out these actions to be more than just her randomly being mean. Having the first thing Pomni say to Jax be, "I didn't know you could play the piano," is incredibly indicative of how Pomni thinks about Jax and how she wants to approach her in this state. Being shown, as Jax says, all the mistakes she's ever made, Pomni choosing to instead comment on the piano from before goes to show she really does care for Jax and wants to communicate that even after seeing those flashbacks, they don't change anything to her. The Stevie Wonder Isn't She Lovely cover that plays over a montage of Jax clips evoked a similar sense of, oh wow, they're really trying to hammer it home, as the bow scene did, while also being something I did really enjoy. Knowing that the song was written about Stevie Wonder's daughter after her birth makes it so unbelievably obvious what it symbolizes within this context. I think Gooseworks herself puts it best. When someone asked about the subject of the song, she replied saying, "A newborn baby girl." Yeah, Jax might have finally gotten to accept herself and accept that the people around her would support her no matter what. The real Jax might have been born only if she was given a little more time to fully work through her feelings and actually materialize. The final thing I saw people talking about was how after all was said and done, Pomni still he-hemmed Jax to the rest of the circus. I remember thinking about that when I was watching the first time, and actually I think Pomni saying, "You could have just talked to me, man," was a little silly. But also you do have to recognize, it's just not really her place to out Jax to everyone. In a similar vein, people talking about how Jax couldn't be trans because Leroy, Jax's real self, doesn't look quote-unquote the part is equally pretty weird to me. I mean, when I saw how they looked, and I feel very Reddit saying this, that's a boy motor right there. And we know nothing about what's going on in Lee's life other than him getting a job and going to Zubul's bar, but I find it really funny that people had this expectation that right after escaping homelessness, they already had all that gender shit on lock. I do think this is an interesting case of learning how insular trans spaces tend to be, given that a majority of cis viewers had literally no idea that Lee is bar for bar the boy motor stereotype, let alone that term even exists. In the end though, purely speaking about Jax's character and how her transness was depicted, I was really happy with it all. People saying that Jax was bad representation is a thing I probably shouldn't get into. I've talked plenty already, but I always have to ask, what is good representation then? Jax is the self-insert of self-inserts in the Amazing Digital Circus, and I could appreciate how Gooseworks didn't shy away from making her someone who she might have been afraid of becoming. The little hints throughout the series made the final all the more cathartic for the people who picked up on them since the beginning, and a learning opportunity for those who might not have. I don't know, I just think it was all really neat, and it makes me glad that a work with as big of a platform as the Amazing Digital Circus chose to say something with Jax, rather than leave it in the subtext or making her only interesting because she's trans. It's just something that I haven't really seen often, and I'm glad. Anyways, tune in next time to What a Goddamn Shame! Dude, I'm such a loser. Holy fuck.